Stand by. This is going to be one of the most complete videos you've ever seen about diffusions. I do ask one favor. At the end of this video, please let me know what your top 5 diffusions are in the comments below. Way back, we got 50 comments saying diffusion no matter what. So I listened and spent countless hours to give you my best. So let's go. Okay, in this video, we're gonna test everything from tough spun diffusion, frost diffusions, tough white diffusions, tough Rolex diffusions, grid cloths, tough silk, and soft diffusions. All categories of diffusions from Rosco gels, as well as plexiglass for you still life shooters. Bleached muslin, unbleached muslin, magic cloth, china silk, bed sheets, frosted shower curtains, and unfrosted shower curtains. Now, from the 30,000 foot view, there are 2 ways to diffuse light. Either shooting it through a diffuser, which is what we will be testing, or bouncing it off a surface, which we will not be testing. This video is gonna have multiple chapters, and you're gonna wanna save it so that you can come back to use certain sections like the diffusion comparison tool. That section was designed so you can open the video in 2, 3, even 4 tabs and flip through different pieces of diffusion material to see the differences. First, I'm going to talk about how the test was conducted. This chapter is very important because it will help you see key parts of the images to watch out for in the testing, and you can use it to conduct your own test at home. There's a chapter on what to watch out for. Bed sheets are great for ghost costumes and shower curtains are excellent for keeping your bathroom floor dry, but both could have issues in high heat. But yes, both are still viable options and extremely useful options, especially in a pinch. I've used both myself. There is a chapter on what diffusions solve for. Even if you think you know it all, I'd watch it. And if I left anything out, put it in the comments below. I'm not perfect. And lastly, the actual test, which I hope will be a reference for years to come. Or maybe I'll do this all over again and it's just a reference for a few days to come. So how was this comparison conducted? First, I built a set to replicate light coming through a window. For my light source, I chose a spotlight, which has lighting characteristics that closely resemble sunlight, giving you an extremely contrasty image. I used the leaves on the spotlight so there was only about 2 to 4 inches of light on the sides of the window to minimize light bouncing around our set. Because as you can see here, I added a meter outside the window frame to also measure how much light was being reflected back from the diffusion material. This is very important when considering a diffusion material because the softness you see may not be from the diffusion, but actually from light spilling around your set and reducing the overall contrast of your image. This could be a good or bad thing depending on the look you are going for. The light was set as perpendicular to the window as possible to eliminate the light hitting the diffusion at an angle, while still enabling me to get this shadow on the wall, which is going to play a key role in evaluating our diffusion materials. Next, I enclosed the space enough to eliminate any stray light bouncing around the room from entering our scene. Each image was shot at f/16, and the power on our strobes was changed in order to eliminate any depth of field differences from changing the visual results of the shadows. So changing the power on the strobe can introduce slight color temperature changes, but they are minimally enough that if there is a visual difference between diffusion materials, you'll be able to see it. But I did not meter the color temperature since it wasn't an absolute constant light source. I really want to focus on the quality of light changing, but you will still see color temperature shifts that I believe to be present in the diffusion and not a result of minimal changes in the strobe. So next, I'm going to train your eye what to watch out for. This will help make you hyper aware of what to look for in a diffusion material and will truly help you level up your lighting. After looking at numerous videos on diffusion, I put a lot of thought into what the ideal set would be. So let me give you a tour, and you lighting nerds are really going to dig this. So here is our image with no diffusion. Let me guide you through a few key points to look at. First, we have the glass. See how with no diffusion it has very specular highlights as it sees the spotlight? But once we add a light opal frost 3020, the highlights bloom a bit more and the shadows on the table soften, but the light is still a spot. But once we add a half soft frost 3004, the shadows totally soften. The light is only lightly scattered, and we can now see the diffusion in the glass bloom the light a bit more. Now let's jump to a heavy diffusion, a piece of 1/8 inch plexiglass. See how it has diffused the light so much it has become the new light source? You can see it perfectly reflected in the specular highlights of the glass. So this isn't some random glass. It's placed in the shot so you can understand how the beam of light is being changed by the diffusion. Next, I want you to look at the wall to the left. This lets you know how much of the beam is being scattered. For example, tough Rolex 3000 is a heavy diffusion, but when compared to magic cloth, it doesn't scatter nearly as much. This becomes a very important consideration when you spend a lot of time to light your subject within a scene, but at the last minute you want to soften the light on your subject while minimizing the light affecting the rest of the scene. Here you can see the Rosco Tough Rolex softens the shadows similarly to magic cloth when we look at the face. But when you look at the lips, it does have more specularity. So the magic cloth is softer because it is scattering more light, but the Rolex may have less of an effect on the room you are lighting and thus making it a better consideration for some situations. Next, we have the shadow on the wall to the right. Now this is going to be super enlightening. It is going to let us know 3 things. First, how much of the light is passing through our diffusion material versus how much is being scattered, how much light is wrapping around our model, and how the light is being beamed. So let me break this down. Here we have bleached muslin, a very thick but porous diffusion material. You can see some of the light passing through the window is unaffected and still casts a hard shadow. But the overall contrast of the image has been greatly reduced. So we still have direct hard light passing through our diffusion material, but we also have a good deal of light being scattered. And when we compare tough Rolex 3000 to magic cloth again, the thickness of the shadows lets us know how much light is wrapping around our model. The thinner the shadow, the more light is wrapping around. Now, when I talk about how the light was being beamed, let me introduce you to tough silk. It is a directional diffusion. When placed horizontally, it gives us vertical feathering to the shadows. But when placed vertically, it gives us this cool horizontal feathering to our shadows. I personally like this effect a lot. Now let's talk about fall off. When you place a piece of diffusion between a light source and your subject, you can change the fall off of the light. So that's why I picked a white table and a white wall. You can simply compare the brightness here on the table and the brightness here on the wall to understand how the light is falling off. When lighting with direct sun in a room, your subjects could be feet away and relatively the same exposure. See how both the table and wall are white when no diffusion is used? But if you introduce diffusion to the window, you may need an additional light for the subject furthest away. See how the table is still white? Our model is still illuminated the same, but how dark the right side of the wall has become? If we had a subject near the wall, they would need an additional light. Then we want to look at the overall change it has on the face. Here we see no diffusion compared to magic cloth. The specular highlights in the lips completely change, as well as the softness of the nose shadow. The chin shadow is completely filled in, you see less texture in the skin, and the catch lights in the eyes are completely different. You can also see a large difference in the gold chains and the shadows cast by the clothing. And lastly, I threw in some chromatic aberration in the mix, so you can see how successful certain diffusions are over others at removing chromatic aberration when it's unwanted in a light source. Stay with me now. Let's talk about some things to consider when choosing a diffusion. One thing is turning multiple light sources into one light source without multiple shadows appearing, like Rosco Tough White, Rosco Full Grid Cloth, or a heavy frosted shower curtain. Next is stability. As much as you may want to use a shower curtain, you have no idea how it will respond to heat. If placed close to a fixture, it could melt, yellow, or start off-gassing, leaving a chemical odor on set. Engineered diffusions from companies like Rosco will have designations like tough, meaning they are designed to withstand the heat without melting, catching fire, or quickly yellowing. Not to mention, you can buy them and expect the same results years later. Some are designated silent. For instance, normal grid cloth has an almost wax paper texture and can interfere with audio if blowing in the wind. You can almost hear it as I move it around. But a silent grid cloth is made of a textile and makes no sound when moving. Another designation used is soft. These have a plastic shower curtain-like texture and are also very silent and can be heat welded together, making large pieces of diffusion. Another thing to consider is color shift. When your key light shifts too much from the scene, things can start to look as if though they are artificially lit. Also, in this test, we will see how much light was being absorbed to have an idea of how much light loss you can get when the diffusion materials are compared. Another thing to consider is size. Not everything is easily available for a 12 by 12 frame, and you may be left choosing between a muslin, magic cloth, grid cloth, poly silk, or China silk if you are looking for an off-the-shelf solution in a larger size. So now a little housekeeping. Before we let loose and look at over 30 different types of diffusion, first, the results I'm getting are very specific to what would happen with a direct light source coming through a 20 by 22 inch hole. Every scenario you encounter, the diffusion you use can have completely different results. For example, here is a beauty dish with no diffusion. Now, without changing anything, here is a beauty dish with grid cloth placed over it. In our window test, full grid cloth reduced the light by 2 stops. On this beauty dish, we gained over half a stop. Crazy, right? We have a lot to get through, so I will talk about this at the end of the video. The distance your diffusion has to the light source versus the subject will play a major role in the effects you get as well. Here is the same grid cloth placed close to our model, then midway between the model and the light, and then close to the light. Also consider the light source you are using. You may like one diffusion to soften a spotlight and another to soften a Fresnel. Test, 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 and test more. Test using the diffusion you intend to use on the lights you use. Also remember, not every brand's diffusion is going to be the same. For instance, every brand's muslin is going to be a little bit different. Some people will even custom dye their own. Now, every brand of magic cloth, aka softbox fabric, or grid cloth could also be different. They can all scatter, transmit, bounce, color, and beam light differently. And one of the best ways to test diffusion is buy a 4 by 20 foot roll and have 4 friends cut off a 4 by 5 sheet. And now get to testing and diffusing your favorite light sources. You can use document clips or tape to attach it directly to a light source or a frame. When using a frame, I prefer one with a flat blade edge so you can have more surface to attach it to. These frames are actually designed to be used with gels, diffusion, and fabrics. So let me run through a test with you, then leave you on your own. Here is bleached muslin versus Rosco half density soft frost. So from the wide shot, we can see the bleached muslin has direct hard light passing through, creating a hard shadow on the wall. And there is also light being scattered, as we see on the left. Now the soft frost softens the shadow, but does not scatter the light, as you see the left side remains dark. When you look at the glass, you see a pinpoint source in the bleached muslin giving us the hard shadow, but also the large soft source providing all the scatter versus the soft frost, which just softens the beam, giving us this larger specular bloom highlight. And when we look at the skin, you can see that the muslin is far softer, although it casts a harder shadow on the background. The bleached muslin gives us a mix of both hard and soft light. So now open 2 windows so you can side by side different diffusion materials or just watch them play through. Each diffusion will play 5 seconds, showing the entire shot, 5 seconds on the face, and 5 seconds on the glass to help you choose which diffusion is best for your needs. I'll also put a key in the description with the time code and a link to the diffusions as well. In the comments, please let me know what your top 5 diffusions are, or even your top 2. I know this is going to be hard, but it's a start to really leveling up your lighting and giving your images something slightly different from someone else's. So one thing I feel like I need to make clear in the test that I did is that light coming through a window is not the ideal situation for every piece of diffusion. But I believe it shows us the greatest contrast between different types of diffusion. And as you can see, it kind of really shows us how it's manipulating the light. In the beauty dish test, I used a piece of tough spun, and you can see that it reacts completely differently when put on a softer light source than it did when put on a very hard light source like the spotlight. When used on a beauty dish, the tough spun doesn't change the color as much as grid cloth, and it still gives us kind of a softer, more focused light in which we actually still gained a little bit of exposure on our subject. So that's why I'm saying test, test, test. So when dealing with light, if you truly want to level up, don't take anything for granted. Try it yourself. If you hear an influencer or someone you like tell you something, don't just completely take it for granted because you may not be working in the same exact situation they may be working in. Try it for yourself. See if it works for you. Take notes. Document your results. This is how you will truly level up your lighting. My name is Ab Sesay. I'm so glad you stuck with me through this video. Please, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know about your favorite diffusion. Like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell so you can see content just like this. And it is my pleasure to bring you videos and content where we take a little bit of a deeper dive to help you level up your lighting. Because as you know, there's levels to this.